The ceramic mug felt cold in my hands, even though the coffee inside was still steaming. I stared at the words printed in cheerful pink letters. World's most pointless woman. My husband Derek and my 17-year-old son Tyler were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Derek slapped the kitchen table, wiping tears from his eyes. "Come on, Brooke, it's hilarious. You have to admit it's funny." Tyler nodded eagerly, his phone already out to capture my reaction. I forced my lips into a smile, the same practiced expression I'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. "Very creative," I managed, setting the mug down carefully. They went back to their pancakes, Derek scrolling through his phone while Tyler texted furiously. I cleared their plates, scraped the syrup, sticky remnants into the garbage, and filled the sink with hot, soapy water. The dishes clinked softly as I washed them, the only sound breaking the silence they'd left behind. That night, Derek snored beside me, completely oblivious to the storm brewing 3 feet away. The blue glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face as I typed "way ticket Chicago" into the search bar. My fingers trembled slightly as I entered my credit card information, the same card Derek thought was just for grocery emergencies. He had no idea I'd been saving every spare dollar for over 8 years, transforming birthday checks from my mother and returned purchases into a secret financial foundation. The confirmation email appeared in my inbox at 11:47 p.m. Departure, May 16, 7:30 a.m. I closed the laptop, slipped it under my side of the bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn broke through our bedroom curtains. The house felt different that final morning. Every familiar sound carried new weight. The coffee maker's gurgle, Tyler's alarm buzzing down the hall, Derek's shower running upstairs. I moved through our morning routine like an actress playing a role she'd grown tired of performing. Derek kissed my forehead absently before grabbing his briefcase. "Late meeting tonight," he called from the garage. "Don't wait up." Tyler mumbled something about staying at his friend Jake's house, shouldering his backpack without making eye contact. They left within minutes of each other, their absence creating space I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I pulled one suitcase from the closet, choosing clothes I actually liked instead of the practical, forgettable pieces Derek preferred. My hands moved with surprising steadiness as I folded silk blouses I'd bought on sale but never worn, the black dress that made me feel confident, the heels that added 3 inches to my height and my attitude. At the bottom of my jewelry box, beneath tangled necklaces I rarely touched, my fingers found the small key I'd hidden there years ago. The safety deposit box downtown contained more than just important documents. It held the evidence of my transformation from Derek's diminished wife back into the financial strategist I'd once been. The taxi arrived exactly on time. I locked the front door, dropped the key under the decorative pot where Derek always expected to find it, and walked toward my future without looking back. The driver loaded my single suitcase while I settled into the back seat, watching our neighborhood fade into the distance. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Forgot to mention, dinner with the Johnsons tonight. Wear something nice." I turned the phone off and dropped it into my purse. He'd figure out soon enough that I wouldn't be wearing anything nice for him ever again. The plane lifted off exactly as scheduled, carrying me away from 15 years of slowly disappearing into someone else's idea of who I should be. As Chicago's skyline came into view, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a decade, anticipation instead of dread. Derek thought he'd married a woman who would be content, washing dishes and managing his calendar forever. He had no idea he'd actually married a woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school and spent 5 years building portfolios that consistently outperformed the market. Before Tyler was born, I was Brooke Anderson, the financial advisor who could spot market trends 3 months before my competitors. Investment firms competed for my signature on partnership agreements. My corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, and my client list included Fortune 500 executives who trusted me with their retirement futures. But Derek convinced me that successful mothers stayed home, that Tyler needed my full attention, that my career was just a phase I'd outgrow. Gradually, my business suits disappeared from the closet, replaced by yoga pants and cardigans. My financial software subscriptions expired, my professional licenses lapsed, and my confidence eroded one dismissed opinion at a time. What Derek never realized was that my analytical mind never stopped working. While he assumed I spent my days watching television and organizing closets, I was actually tracking market movements on my laptop, studying emerging trends, and most importantly, building a portfolio that had grown from $3,000 to nearly $800,000. Every birthday check from my mother, every rebate from household purchases, every dollar I saved by choosing generic groceries over brand names went into carefully researched investments. I bought stocks in companies Derek had never heard of, diversified across industries he couldn't pronounce, and watched my secret account balance grow steadily year after year. The hotel room I'd booked online turned out to be a corner suite with floor, 2, ceiling windows overlooking the river. I stood at the glass wall, still wearing yesterday's clothes but feeling like a completely different person. My reflection looked unfamiliar. For the first time in years, my shoulders weren't curved inward, my expression wasn't carefully neutral, and my eyes held something that looked like determination. I opened my laptop and began transferring funds from various accounts, consolidating resources I'd scattered across different banks to avoid Derek's detection. My phone buzzed with the first worried text. "Where are you?" "Tyler said you weren't here when he got home." I ignored it, focusing instead on the numbers flowing across my screen. 830, 7,420, $2.63. Not bad for a woman Derek considered pointless. The second text arrived an hour later. "This isn't funny anymore. Call me back." I powered down the phone and ordered room service, charging the $60 dinner to the credit card Derek didn't know existed. But as I sat enjoying perfectly prepared salmon and watching the city lights twinkle below, my laptop chimed with an email that made my blood freeze. It was a bank statement for an account I'd forgotten I owned, a retirement fund from my old firm that Derek was supposed to be managing for tax purposes. The balance was wrong, significantly wrong. According to my records, there should have been $193,000 in that account. The statement showed a balance of $47,312. I grabbed my phone, powering it back up despite my better judgment, and called the bank's customer service line. After 20 minutes of being transferred between departments, a patient representative named Carol confirmed my worst fear. Someone with authorized access had been making regular withdrawals for the past 18 months. Large withdrawals. The signatures on file matched mine, but I hadn't made a single transaction on that account since 2018. "Ma'am, according to our records, your husband has been the one making these withdrawals. He has power of attorney for this account, and the signatures have been verified by our fraud prevention team each time." Carol's voice was sympathetic, but matter of fact. "Is there a problem with these transactions?" I hung up without answering, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Derek hadn't just dismissed my opinions and diminished my self-worth. He'd been stealing from me. Systematically. Legally, because I'd trusted him enough to sign those power of attorney papers years ago when Tyler was small and I was overwhelmed with new motherhood. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I paced between the windows and the bed, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. How much had he taken? Where had the money gone? More importantly, what else had he been hiding? I opened my laptop again, this time with a different purpose. If Derek thought he'd married a naive housewife he could manipulate and steal from, he was about to discover exactly how wrong he'd been. I spent the rest of the night transferring every accessible dollar into accounts he couldn't touch, liquidating investments he didn't know about, and documenting every suspicious transaction I could find. By sunrise, I'd moved over $700,000 beyond his reach and begun building a case that would expose him for exactly what he was, a thief who'd spent years stealing from his own wife. Madison Walsh answered her phone on the second ring, her voice as sharp and confident as I remembered. "Brooke Anderson, is that really you?" She'd been my partner for 3 years before I left the firm, the kind of brilliant strategist who could analyze complex market data while negotiating million-dollar deals. While I'd been folding laundry and organizing playdates, Madison had expanded our old firm into a national powerhouse with offices in 7 major cities. "I'm in Chicago," I said without preamble, "and I need your help with something complicated." Within 2 hours, I was sitting across from her in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the financial district. Madison looked exactly like the successful executive she'd become, perfectly tailored navy suit, designer glasses that somehow made her look both approachable and formidable, and the kind of confident posture that commanded respect from everyone in the room. She listened without interruption as I explained Derek's theft, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, but never once looking surprised or skeptical. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled grimly. "I always thought there was something off about that husband of yours. Too smooth, too eager to convince everyone how wonderful he was." She turned her laptop screen toward me, revealing a financial database I recognized from my old career. "Let's see what else Derek has been up to." What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Derek hadn't just stolen from my retirement account. He'd been using my name, my old credentials, and my reputation to establish investment relationships with elderly clients who trusted the Brooke Anderson name from my previous career. He'd created fake email accounts using variations of my professional address, forged my signature on documents, and convinced vulnerable retirees to transfer their savings into accounts he controlled. "This is beyond simple theft," Madison said, scrolling through pages of fraudulent transactions. "This is identity fraud, elder abuse, and securities violations. We're talking about federal crimes here." She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "I'm calling my contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're going to want to see everything we've found." While Madison spoke in rapid legal terminology to someone named Agent Rivera, I stared at the evidence spread across her desk. Derek had stolen over $400,000 from 12 different victims, all people who remembered me from articles I'd written or presentations I'd given years ago. He'd used their trust in my reputation to fund his lifestyle, probably telling himself he deserved it because he was married to the woman who'd earned that reputation in the first place. "Rivera wants to meet with you tomorrow morning," Madison said after hanging up. "But here's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to file a police report, freeze every account Derek has access to, and start building a case that will put him away for a very long time." She stood up, straightening her jacket with the kind of purposeful movement I remembered from our partnership days. "But first, we're going to make sure you never have to depend on anyone else's permission to live your life again." Madison's plan was elegant and thorough. We spent the afternoon establishing Brooke Anderson Financial Recovery, a consulting firm specializing in helping fraud victims rebuild their portfolios and protect their assets. Madison's existing company would provide the infrastructure and legal support, while I handled the client relationships and investment strategies. Within 6 hours, I had business cards, a professional website, and a corner office with my name on the door. "The beautiful thing about Derek's crimes," Madison explained as we finalized the paperwork, "is that he's created the perfect market for your services. Every one of his victims is going to need expert financial guidance to recover their losses. And who better to provide that guidance than the woman whose name he stole to commit those crimes in the first place?" My phone had been buzzing constantly throughout the day, Derek's messages growing increasingly frantic. "Where are you? Tyler is worried sick. Whatever I did, we can work it out. Please just come home so we can talk." I handed the phone to Madison, who read through the messages with professional detachment. "He still has no idea you know about the theft," she said. "That gives us a significant advantage. Let him keep thinking you just ran away because your feelings were hurt. The longer he stays focused on the wrong problem, the more time we have to build an airtight case against him. But as we prepared to leave the office that evening, my phone rang with a call that changed everything. It was Derek's sister, Sarah, her voice tight with a kind of controlled panic I'd never heard before. "Brooke," Derek called me in tears. "He found your note." "I didn't leave a note," I said, meeting Madison's eyes across the desk. "The one you left on his computer," Sarah continued. "About knowing what he's been doing with your accounts. He's absolutely losing his mind. He's talking about calling the police, saying you've stolen money from him. What's going on?" I hadn't left any note. I'd been careful not to leave any trace of my plans, which meant Derek had discovered something else entirely. Something that had made him panic enough to create his own fictional version of my departure. My stomach clenched as I realized what must have happened. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important. Has Derek ever mentioned having financial problems? Debts? Gambling? Anything like that?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Last Christmas, he asked me for a loan. Said it was just temporary, something about a business investment that went wrong. He paid me back in February, but Brooke, he asked for $50,000. I thought you knew." Madison was already pulling up Derek's credit reports on her computer. What we found explained everything. Derek wasn't just a thief, he was a desperate thief. Credit cards maxed out, business loans in default, and a pattern of increasing desperation that made him dangerous in ways I was only beginning to understand. The penthouse apartment Madison found for me was everything Derek's suburban prison had never been. Exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, and windows that flooded every room with natural light. I signed the lease using my maiden name, Anderson, reclaiming an identity I'd buried under Derek's expectations. For the first time in 15 years, I woke up in a space that belonged entirely to me. Brooke Anderson Financial Recovery launched with 3 major clients in the first week. Word spread quickly through Chicago's financial community that the Brooke Anderson was back in business, and this time she was specializing in fraud recovery. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman whose name had been stolen to commit fraud was now the expert helping others recover from similar crimes. My first television interview aired on Channel 7's morning show, where I spoke about red flags for financial fraud without mentioning Derek by name. The segment went viral within hours, shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Investment firms began calling, offering partnership deals. Law firms wanted to retain me as an expert witness. Speaking bureaus offered lucrative contracts for conference presentations. The money flowed in faster than I could have imagined. Consulting fees, expert witness payments, media appearances, and speaking engagements generated more income in 2 weeks than I'd seen in the previous 2 years combined. I bought clothes that made me feel powerful instead of invisible. Tailored suits in bold colors, statement jewelry that caught conference room lighting, shoes that announced my arrival before I spoke a single word. Derek's social media presence became increasingly desperate. He posted photos of our empty house with captions like, "Missing my beautiful wife" and "Come home, Brooke. We need to talk." His friends and family left supportive comments, all of them believing his narrative that his wife had suffered some kind of breakdown and disappeared without explanation. But while Derek was playing the role of worried husband online, Tyler was discovering a very different truth at home. He called me on a Thursday evening, his voice shaky, in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Mom, I found something in Dad's office. Something really bad." "What did you find, sweetheart?" "Papers with your name on them. Bank stuff and investment things. But Mom, the signatures don't look like yours. They're close, but not quite right. And there are dates on them, from times when you were with me at doctor's appointments or school events. I remember because I wrote some of those days in my journal." My son had accidentally uncovered evidence of Derek's forgery. More importantly, he'd realized something was wrong without any prompting from me. "Tyler, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you take pictures of those papers without your father knowing?" "I already did," he said, and I could hear him typing on his phone. "I'm sending them to you right now." "Mom, there's something else. Dad's been saying things about you for years. Bad things. He told me you were sick, that you might hurt yourself or me if you got too upset. He said you couldn't handle stress, and that's why you never worked anymore." The photos Tyler sent made my hands shake with rage. Derek had been forging my signature for over 3 years, not just on the elderly victims' accounts but on our joint finances, tax documents, and legal papers. But Tyler's other revelation cut even deeper. Derek had been systematically poisoning our son against me, creating a narrative of mental instability that would justify any erratic behavior I might display. "Sweetheart, your father has been lying to you about me. None of those things are true. I'm not sick, I'm not unstable, and I would never hurt you." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Your father has been stealing money using my name, and I left because I found out about it." Tyler was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, older somehow. I kind of wondered. "You never seemed crazy to me, just sad. And Dad always got weird when I asked why you seemed sad all the time." That night, I called Agent Rivera and arranged to meet Tyler at a neutral location where he could provide his testimony and evidence to federal investigators. My son, who Derek had tried to turn against me, was about to become the key witness in his father's downfall. But Derek wasn't finished with his manipulations. When he discovered that Tyler had been in contact with me, he exploded in a way that revealed the true extent of his desperation. Tyler called me at midnight, whispering into his phone from his bedroom closet. "Mom, he went crazy when he found out I talked to you. He said you'd brainwashed me, that you were trying to turn me against him. Then he started saying things that didn't make sense. He said he'd been protecting me from you, that you'd been taking medication that made you dangerous, that he'd been putting it in your coffee to keep you stable." The room spun around me as Tyler's words sank in. Derek hadn't just been stealing my money and forging my signature, he'd been drugging me. The years of feeling foggy and confused, the difficulty concentrating, the constant exhaustion I'd attributed to depression. It hadn't been my imagination or my failure to cope. Derek had been systematically poisoning me to make me more compliant and easier to control. "Tyler, I need you to pack a bag and go to your Aunt Sarah's house right now. Don't tell your father where you're going. I'm calling the police, and I don't want you in that house when they arrive." "Mom, I'm scared. What if he tries to hurt you?" "He can't hurt me anymore, baby. I'm stronger than he ever realized, and now I have help from people who know how to stop men like him." I was already dialing Madison's number with my other hand. "Pack your bag and get out of there. I'll call Sarah and explain everything." As I hung up with Tyler and connected with Madison, I realized Derek had just made a fatal mistake. By revealing the drugging to Tyler, he'd provided evidence of a federal crime that would add years to his eventual sentence. More importantly, he'd lost the one ally he'd counted on to bring me back under his control. My son was finally seeing his father clearly, and what he saw terrified him enough to choose my side without hesitation. The FBI arrived at Derek's house at 6 in the morning, armed with warrants for his arrest and seizure of all financial documents. I watched the news coverage from my penthouse apartment while sipping coffee from a mug that read "Boss Lady," a gift from Madison to replace the cruel Mother's Day present that had started everything. Tyler had spent the night at Sarah's house, and she'd called me in tears after he explained what Derek had been doing. "I should have known," she kept saying. "I should have seen the signs. He's my brother, but what he did to you is unforgivable." Derek's company fired him before noon. Once the FBI investigation revealed he'd been embezzling from corporate accounts as well as committing fraud in my name. The news spread through our old neighborhood like wildfire. Neighbors who'd watched me become increasingly isolated and withdrawn over the years suddenly understood that Derek hadn't been the devoted husband he'd pretended to be. My business continued expanding at a pace that left me breathless. Phoenix Financial Recovery now had 12 employees, offices in Chicago and New York, and a waiting list of clients that stretched into the following year. Major news networks wanted interviews. Publishers offered book deals. Law enforcement agencies requested my consultation on complex financial crimes. But the most satisfying moment came when Derek's desperate social media posts took a darker turn. He stopped pretending to be the worried husband and began posting rambling accusations about me stealing his money, destroying his life, and turning his son against him. His friends stopped commenting supportively. His professional contacts began distancing themselves publicly. "Please, if anyone sees her, tell her we just want her home," he posted on Facebook, along with a photo of our empty house. The desperation in his words was obvious to everyone reading them. The comment section filled with people asking uncomfortable questions about why his wife had left so suddenly and why he seemed so focused on money instead of her well-being. Tyler moved in with Sarah permanently after Derek was arrested on federal charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The drugging charges were harder to prove since I'd never had blood tests during the worst periods, but the psychological manipulation was clearly documented in Tyler's testimony and the fake medical records Derek had created to support his claims about my mental health. I bought a house 3 blocks from Sarah's, close enough that Tyler could walk between homes, but far enough that Derek would never have any claim to the property. It was a Victorian mansion with a wraparound porch, the kind of house I'd dreamed of owning when I was young and ambitious. The mortgage payment was less than what I now earned in a typical week. Tyler spent most afternoons at my house, doing homework at the kitchen island while I prepared dinner in a kitchen designed for someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He was seeing a therapist to help process years of his father's manipulation, and slowly our relationship was rebuilding on a foundation of honesty instead of Derek's lies. "I'm sorry I believed him," Tyler said one evening as we walked through my new neighborhood. "I should have known you weren't crazy. You were just trapped. You were a child, and he was supposed to be someone you could trust. None of this was your fault." I stopped walking and turned to face him, "But I need you to understand something important. I'm not trapped anymore, and I'm never going to let anyone trap me again." The transformation in my appearance was obvious to everyone who'd known me during my marriage to Derek. I'd gained weight in healthy places, my hair was professionally styled instead of pulled back in defeated ponytails, and my clothes announced confidence instead of hiding insecurity. I wore red lipstick, statement earrings, and heels that made me tall enough to look most people directly in the eye. Madison and I had become more than business partners. We'd become genuine friends, united by shared ambition and mutual respect. She was brilliant, funny, and completely uninterested in diminishing herself to make anyone else feel more comfortable. Being around her reminded me of who I used to be before Derek convinced me that success was selfish and ambition was unattractive. But Derek's story wasn't over. 3 months after his arrest, while he was out on bail awaiting trial, he made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative that had escaped him completely. The phone call came at 2 a.m. It was Sarah, crying so hard she could barely speak coherently. "Brooke, you need to get to the hospital. Derek tried to kill himself. He's alive, but barely. And Brooke, he left a note, a confession, about everything he did to you, things that are even worse than we knew." The suicide note was 12 pages long, handwritten in Derek's careful script, and detailed crimes that went far beyond financial fraud. He'd been drugging my morning coffee with benzodiazepines for over 2 years, carefully calculating doses that would keep me compliant and confused without being obviously incapacitated. He'd researched the symptoms, monitored my reactions, and adjusted the amounts based on my behavior. But the drugging was just the beginning of a plan that was far more sinister than I'd imagined. Derek had been building a case for my involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility. He'd forged medical records suggesting I'd been treated for severe depression and anxiety. He'd created fake emails and text messages that portrayed me as increasingly unstable and potentially dangerous. He'd even recorded conversations where he deliberately provoked me, editing out his provocations and keeping only my frustrated responses. The plan was to have you committed within 6 months, Agent Rivera explained as we sat in the hospital waiting room while Derek recovered from his overdose attempt. He would have gained legal control of all marital assets, including your secret accounts once they were discovered during the commitment proceedings. Your son would have been told you'd suffered a complete breakdown, and Derek would have been seen as the devoted husband struggling to care for a mentally ill wife. I stared at the confession letter, my hands surprisingly steady, as I read through years of calculated abuse, designed to destroy my sanity and steal my independence. Derek hadn't just been stealing my money, he'd been stealing my mind, my reality, and my relationship with my own child. How long would I have been committed? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. In cases like this, often permanently. Once someone is declared mentally incompetent, it's extremely difficult to reverse that legal status. Derek would have had complete control over your finances and medical decisions for the rest of your life. Tyler sat beside me, holding my hand while we processed the full extent of his father's betrayal. He'd been secretly recording conversations with Derek for weeks, documenting the lies and manipulations his father continued to spin even after my disappearance. The recordings would be crucial evidence in the federal case, but they'd also revealed the depth of Derek's hatred for the woman who dared to be more intelligent and capable than him. He kept saying you thought you were better than him, Tyler told the investigators. He said you needed to be taught a lesson about who was really in charge. He talked about you like you were his property, instead of his wife. Derek survived the suicide attempt, but the confession note had sealed his fate legally and socially. The local newspaper picked up the story, running headlines about financial fraud and domestic abuse that made Derek infamous throughout our former community. His friends stopped visiting, his family stopped taking his calls, and his lawyers began discussing plea bargains instead of defenses. But Derek's destruction created space for my reconstruction. Phoenix Financial Recovery was featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the year's fastest-growing consulting firms. I was invited to speak at conferences about financial fraud, domestic abuse, and women's economic empowerment. My story resonated with thousands of women who recognized their own experiences in Derek's systematic campaign to diminish and control me. The speaking engagements led to media appearances, which led to book deals and documentary offers. Publishers competed for the rights to my story, offering advances that exceeded Derek's total theft by substantial margins. I chose the publisher who understood that my story wasn't just about surviving abuse, but about the power women could reclaim when they stopped accepting less than they deserved. Madison and I expanded Phoenix Financial Recovery into a nationwide network of offices specializing in fraud recovery, asset protection, and financial independence for abuse survivors. We hired brilliant women who'd been underestimated by previous employers, creating a company culture that celebrated competence instead of compliance. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after Derek's arrest, when I received a call from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Derek's victims had been awarded full restitution from seized assets, and the SEC was launching a national task force on financial abuse. They wanted me to lead the initiative, traveling the country to train law enforcement and financial professionals to recognize and prevent the kind of systematic fraud Derek had perpetrated. You'd be the public face of financial crime prevention, the SEC director explained. Your story gives us credibility with victims who might not trust law enforcement to understand what they've experienced. I accepted the position immediately, understanding that Derek's attempt to destroy me had instead created a platform to help thousands of other women recognize and escape similar situations. His plan to make me powerless had backfired spectacularly, transforming me into one of the most influential voices in financial crime prevention. Tyler was accepted to Northwestern University with a full scholarship, choosing to study business and criminal justice. He decided to dedicate his career to helping other families recover from financial fraud, Understanding that his father's crimes had given him unique insights into how predators operated within seemingly normal relationships. I want to make sure other kids don't grow up thinking their mothers are crazy when they're actually being poisoned, he told me as we toured the campus where I'd earned my own degree 20 years earlier. Dad made me an expert on lies. I want to use that expertise to help people recognize the truth. Derek's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. The federal prosecutors were recommending 25 years without parole, given the scope of his crimes and the vulnerability of his victims. He would likely spend the rest of his productive life in federal prison, stripped of the power he'd used to hurt so many people. But even as justice approached, Derek made one final attempt to manipulate the narrative that had completely escaped his control. The call came from Derek's attorney, a tired-sounding public defender who'd been assigned his case after his previous lawyers withdrew when his assets were seized. "Mrs. Anderson, my client would like to speak with you before his sentencing hearing. He claims he has information about other victims that might help with their recovery." I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. Derek still believed he could find an angle, some way to negotiate his way out of the consequences of his actions. But Agent Rivera thought the meeting might be valuable, and Tyler wanted to know what his father might say when he was finally cornered completely. The federal detention center was exactly as grim as I'd expected. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of institutional smell that lingered in your clothes hours after leaving. Derek looked smaller than I remembered, his expensive suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit that made him look like exactly what he was, a common criminal. He tried to smile when I walked into the visiting room, the same charming expression that had once convinced me to trust him with my entire life. "Brooke, you look incredible. Success suits you." "What do you want, Derek?" I kept my voice level, professional, the tone I used with clients whose cases disgusted me, but who deserved competent representation nonetheless. "I want to apologize. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I know I hurt Tyler. I was desperate, and I made terrible choices." He leaned forward, trying to create intimacy across the metal table that separated us. "But I can help you, help my victims. I know where the money went, how to trace assets that haven't been recovered yet. The FBI has already recovered everything. Your cooperation isn't necessary." Derek's facade cracked slightly, revealing the frustrated anger underneath. "You don't understand what you've destroyed, Brooke. I had plans, investments, opportunities that could have made us wealthy beyond anything you're achieving now. You threw it all away because you couldn't trust me to manage our finances." "Our finances?" I let the incredulity show in my voice. "You mean the money you stole from my accounts and elderly victims who trusted my reputation? I was investing it, building something bigger than your small-minded consulting firm." Derek's voice rose slightly before he caught himself and tried to regain control. "I could have made us millions if you'd just stayed quiet and let me work." There it was. The truth Derek had probably never admitted even to himself. He hadn't been stealing from me to solve financial problems. He'd been stealing from me because he resented my success and wanted to prove he could build something bigger, using my reputation and intelligence as raw materials for his own ambitions. "You weren't investing anything," I said quietly. "You were gambling with other people's money because you couldn't accept that your wife was smarter and more capable than you were." Derek's mask finally fell away completely. The charming smile disappeared, replaced by the cold fury I'd glimpsed in moments throughout our marriage when he thought I wasn't looking. "You think you're so superior, don't you? So much better than the man who gave you a home and a family and a life worth living. You didn't give me anything, Derek. You took everything I built and tried to convince me it was worthless. You drugged me to make me compliant, lied to our son to turn him against me, and stole my money to fund your delusions of adequacy. I made you into someone worth marrying." Derek slammed his hand against the table, causing the guard to step forward warningly. "Before me, you were just another ambitious woman who thought career success made her special. I taught you what really mattered." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Derek said nothing useful about victim recovery or asset tracing. Instead, he revealed the depth of his resentment toward successful women in general and me specifically. He'd married me not because he loved me, but because he wanted to own someone whose achievements exceeded his own. When I left the detention center, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Derek had spent 15 years of his life systematically destroying the woman he'd married because her competence made him feel inadequate. He'd committed federal crimes, ruined his relationship with his son, and guaranteed himself decades in prison, all because he couldn't accept that his wife was simply better at business than he was. Tyler was waiting in the parking lot, having driven himself to the meeting despite my offers to arrange transportation. He'd turned 18 the previous week, and the birthday celebration had been everything Derek's manipulative Mother's Day gifts had never been: genuine, thoughtful, and focused on honoring who I actually was instead of diminishing me. "How did it go?" Tyler asked as we walked toward our cars. "Your father is exactly who we thought he was: manipulative, resentful, and completely unable to take responsibility for his choices." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "But Tyler, I want you to understand something important. His failures don't reflect on you. You have his genetics, but you have my values. You've already proven you're capable of choosing truth over convenience and justice over loyalty." Tyler hugged me in the parking lot, a gesture that would have been impossible during the years when Derek was poisoning his perception of me. "I'm proud to be your son," he said simply. Derek's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. I'd been asked to provide a victim impact statement, an opportunity to explain how his crimes had affected my life and the lives of his other victims. I'd spent weeks preparing my remarks, crafting words that would convey the full scope of his betrayal without revealing how much power he'd once held over my happiness. But the night before the hearing, Tyler asked me a question that reframed everything I thought I wanted to say. "Mom, what do you want people to remember about this story? That Dad was a criminal? Or that you became stronger than he ever imagined you could be?" I rewrote my victim impact statement that night, focusing not on Derek's crimes but on the transformation his betrayal had made possible. The woman who stood up to speak at his sentencing hearing would be completely different from the woman who'd received that cruel mug on Mother's Day, and that transformation was the real story worth telling. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and advocates who'd followed my story from the beginning. 1 year and 2 weeks after Derek had given me that mug calling me the world's most pointless woman, I stood in front of federal judge Patricia Hamilton, preparing to deliver the final words Derek would hear before learning his sentence. I wore a red suit that I'd bought specifically for this moment, the color chosen to symbolize power instead of the neutral tones Derek had always preferred. My statement was 3 pages long, but I'd memorized every word during the sleepless nights leading up to this hearing. "Your Honor, Derek Anderson didn't just steal my money. He stole my reality, my confidence, and nearly stole my relationship with my son. For years, I believed I was weak, confused, and incapable of managing my own life. I now know that confusion was deliberate, caused by medication he secretly administered and lies he systematically constructed." I looked directly at Derek as I spoke, watching him try to maintain his composure in the orange jumpsuit that had replaced his expensive suits. Tyler sat in the first row behind me, his presence a reminder that some relationships could be rebuilt even after devastating betrayal. But Derek made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed that by making me feel powerless, he would actually make me powerless. Instead, his betrayal forced me to rediscover strengths I'd forgotten I possessed. The woman standing before you today is not a victim seeking sympathy. She is a successful businesswoman, a respected expert in financial crime prevention, and the mother of a remarkable young man who chose truth over loyalty to a father who had manipulated him for years. Judge Hamilton listened intently, occasionally making notes but never interrupting. Derek's attorney had advised him not to make a statement understanding that anything he said would likely reveal more of the arrogance and entitlement that had motivated his crimes in the first place. Phoenix Financial Recovery has helped over 300 victims of financial fraud recover more than $12 million in stolen assets. We've trained law enforcement agencies in 15 states to recognize and investigate financial abuse. We've lobbied successfully for stronger penalties for domestic financial crimes. None of this would have existed if Derek had succeeded in his plan to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Derek's attempt to destroy my career had instead launched me into national prominence as an expert on exactly the crimes he'd committed. His effort to steal my independence had forced me to become more independent than I'd ever imagined possible. Your Honor, I do not ask for Derek to be shown mercy because of his relationship to me. I ask for him to be sentenced based on the scope of his crimes and the vulnerability of his victims. But I also want this court to understand that his greatest failure was not understanding the woman he married. He saw my kindness as weakness, my trust as naivety, and my love for our family as vulnerability he could exploit indefinitely. Judge Hamilton sentenced Derek to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The elderly victims he'd defrauded were present for the sentencing, many of them having recovered their stolen assets through Phoenix Financial Recovery's intervention. Their presence reminded everyone that Derek's crimes had extended far beyond his marriage, affecting people who'd never had any reason to distrust him. Tyler and I left the courthouse together, walking past reporters who shouted questions about justice, recovery, and whether I felt vindicated by Derek's sentence. I answered a few questions about financial abuse prevention and the importance of supporting fraud victims, but mostly I focused on the future instead of the past. That evening, Madison and I celebrated at the restaurant where we'd first planned Phoenix Financial Recovery. The company now employed 67 people across 8 offices, with annual revenues exceeding $15 million. We'd been featured in Harvard Business Review as a case study in rapid business growth, and law schools were beginning to teach courses based on our victim recovery methodologies. But the celebration I'd been anticipating most was still ahead of me. The next morning was Mother's Day, exactly 1 year after Derek and Tyler had given me the mug that changed my life forever. Tyler had asked permission to plan something special, and I'd agreed without knowing what he had in mind. I woke up in my mansion, in my bedroom with floor, 2 ceiling windows that flooded the space with morning light. The view from my bed included Lake Michigan in the distance, a sight that reminded me every morning how far I'd traveled from the suburban house where I'd once felt trapped and diminished. Tyler arrived at 10 in the morning, carrying a wrapped package that was clearly another mug, but this time, his expression was serious rather than cruel, respectful rather than mocking. "Mom, I need to apologize for last year. I thought Dad's gift was funny because I believed his lies about you. I know better now." The new mug was white ceramic with gold lettering that read, "World's Most Powerful Woman." But attached to the mug was a letter Tyler had written, explaining how watching my transformation had taught him to recognize strength in forms he'd never understood before. "You taught me that real power isn't loud or aggressive," Tyler had written. "It's the quiet decision to stop accepting treatment you don't deserve. It's the courage to rebuild your life when someone destroys it. It's the choice to help other people instead of seeking revenge against the person who hurt you." We spent Mother's Day morning walking through my neighborhood, talking about Tyler's college plans and my upcoming book tour. Publishers were competing for international rights to my story, and documentary producers were bidding for the film rights. The woman Derek had called pointless was about to become the subject of global media attention, focused on financial empowerment and domestic abuse recovery. But more importantly, Tyler and I were building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect instead of Derek's manipulation and lies. My son was becoming the kind of man who understood that supporting women meant celebrating their strength instead of trying to diminish it. That afternoon, I drove to the offices of Phoenix Financial Recovery, where my staff had prepared a surprise celebration. The conference room was filled with flowers, and the walls displayed framed articles about our company's impact on fraud recovery and prevention. But the centerpiece of the celebration was a display case containing the original World's Most Pointless Woman mug, now preserved as a reminder of how far we'd all traveled. Madison gave a speech about the importance of transforming personal pain into professional purpose. Several clients shared stories about how our services had helped them rebuild after devastating financial betrayal. The afternoon felt like a graduation ceremony, marking my complete transformation from victim to victor. As the celebration concluded, I found myself standing alone in my office, holding both mugs and thinking about the year that had changed everything. Derek had intended to humiliate me, to reinforce his belief that I was worthless without his approval and support. Instead, he'd forced me to rediscover capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed and strengths I'd never fully tested. The view from my office window showed the city skyline where I'd built a business empire, established my reputation as a national expert, and created a legacy that would help thousands of women recognize and escape financial abuse. None of it would have happened if Derek had continued successfully manipulating me into believing I was weak and dependent. I thought about all the women who might be sitting at kitchen tables right now, washing dishes while their husbands and children dismissed their worth and potential. I thought about the speech I would give next week at the National Conference on Domestic Violence, where I would tell them that betrayal often contains the seeds of liberation, but only if you're brave enough to plant them in soil you prepare yourself. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mom, I'm proud of who you've become, but I'm even prouder of who you've always been. Thank you for showing me that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest people are often the ones who've been told they're weak." As I locked up the office and walked toward the parking garage where my Mercedes waited, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful from the ruins of someone else's destructive plans. Derek had called me pointless because he feared my power. When someone tries to diminish you, they're revealing their own weakness. Real strength isn't loud or demanding attention. It's the quiet moment when you stop accepting less than you deserve and start building the life you've always been capable of living. Every betrayal contains the seeds of your liberation, but only if you're brave enough to plant them in soil you prepare yourself. Derek thought he was destroying me when he gave me that mug. Instead, he was setting me free to become the woman I'd always had the potential to be, but had never been forced to discover. I thought you might find this story meaningful if you've ever felt undervalued or dismissed by people who should have supported you. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's attempt to diminish you actually revealed your own hidden strength? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help it reach other women who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about transformation and empowerment, and please share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are more powerful than anyone who tries to convince you otherwise. Your strength might be quiet, but it's real, and it's waiting for the right moment to surprise everyone, including yourself.